There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Shoff talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
This is What in the World is Going On. I am your host, Richard Shoff. The program sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes. We're pro-Christian, pro-American, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, and here only by the grace of God. Well, this past week, my wife, who ought to be a commercial shopper, finally gave in and ordered pillows. Yeah, from Mike Lindell, My Pillows. If you watch any news, any cable news at least, oftentimes as commercials are running on every channel that I pick up. Golly, he must spend tens of thousands of dollars a week. It's been on for a long time, and I've seen the pillows, and I've been very impressed by his marketing. Heard some time back that he was a believer. Then I heard another time that he was a staunch Trump supporter. Well, both would give me cause to listen to him a little closer, respect him a whole lot. Well, anyway, my wife ordered the pillows, and they are great. I've tried them. She ordered the sheets, and she just put them on today. She said they were bigger than our normal king-size bed sheets, but I haven't slept on them yet. But she also ordered a pillow for our little canine at home. Well, the canine didn't care about the pillow, and my wife decided to send it back. I'm glad she didn't keep it for herself. I thought maybe she'd get ready to move out on me. I wasn't sure. Anyway, she went through the process that she's supposed to, as instructed, and Mike Lindell's recorded voice came on and told her how to do it. And then while she was waiting for a live operator or more instructions or whatever, the hymn, Amazing Grace, was played. That's a favorite of mine. Yeah. I thought, as an independent businessman myself, and as, of course, a believer, what a great way to witness. It was really impressive. Well, the rest of her story is good. We liked the product. She said customer service was great. Everything looked good. I like doing business with a Christian businessman myself. Helped that he's a Trump supporter. I wholeheartedly endorse My Pillows by Mike Lindell up in Minnesota. I think he's a patriot, believer, a good man, and he runs a tight ship. Hey, and his products are wonderful. Let's take a look at this. There's an anti-abortion film that's really been a surprise at the box offices. This movie's been produced by a Christian radio station about a former employee of an organization that provides abortions who became pro-life activist. It's proving to be a surprising box office hit. The name of the movie, Unplanned. It was released in theaters on March 29th, pulled in more than $10 million in North America, according to Box Office Mojo. Unplanned, the name of the film, comes amid a resurgent campaign in the United States by opponents of abortion, which was legalized in the U.S. in a landmark 73 Supreme Court decision. Among those promoting the movie have been deeply religious Vice President Mike Pence. So good to see movie theaters across the country showing Unplanned movie. According to Pence, he tweeted, "More and more Americans are embracing the sanctity of life because of powerful stories like this one." Building on its early buzz, Unplanned is being shown in more than 1,500 studios right now across the United States. Started out with 1,059 the weekend of its release. Produced by the self-described Christian studio Pure Flex, Unplanned was launched with little advertising because, as you could expect, folks, most cable TV channels refused to air the ads for the film. Anti-abortion groups have denounced this as part of an orchestrated campaign, which they claim also included the film being attributed an R rating by the Motion Picture Association of America. An R rating requires anyone under the age of 18 going to a movie to be accompanied by a parent or adult guardian. Fueling the criticism was the brief suspension by Twitter of the movie's account, which the company attributed to, quote, a technical problem. Well, writing in the Washington Post, columnist Mark Thiessen called Unplanned the movie abortion supporters don't want you to see. Unplanned is based on a book by the same name by Abby Johnson. Abby, a former director of an abortion clinic in Bryan, Texas, run by Planned Parenthood, the largest family planning organization in the U.S. Johnson recounts in the book how she had a spiritual awakening after personally assisting with an abortion. Unplanned has been dismissed by some critics as propaganda. There have been films that treated Nazi doctors conducting evil experience in concentration camps more sympathetically. That's a quote from Frank Schneck in The Hollywood Reporter. Writing in the trade publication Variety, Gwen Lieberman said Unplanned isn't a good movie, but it's effective propaganda. Unplanned preaches to the pro-life choir, and it does so by making a case against abortion that abolitionists and is extreme. The movie's co-director, Gary Solomon, shrugged off the criticism. He said, "We don't turn this into a propaganda piece, and we won't. We refuse to do that. We wanted to tell a true story and let the truth be interpreted by people that see us," his quote. It's an exact retelling of the book, Solomon said. Everything in the movie is based on her true story. We didn't fabricate anything. We didn't make up anything. A big plug for Unplanned was on Twitter, but something happened. It was too hot for Twitter. You see, Unplanned blows out box office projections. The pro-life highlighting the truth about abortion through the eyes of a former supporter of abortion was not only suppressed significantly on Twitter, it claimed that was an error. It was also blocked from advertising on network, Lifetime, HGTV, and the Hallmark Channel. This movie was partially financed by, well, Michael Lindell, the multimillionaire founder of MyPillow. They point out he's a born-again Christian and an outspoken supporter of President Donald Trump. The $6 million film is playing best in conservative-leaning states in the Midwest and the South, where 9 of the top grossing theaters were. Incidentally, there's a closing scene of this movie, and I have not seen it yet, but the closing scene, there's somebody riding a horse or a tractor in it. Well, that's Mike Lindell. We just talked about him in our opening moments. Here's an added bonus for the Unplanned movie makers, noted by Deadline Hollywood. Ironically, if the intent is to shut down the account was an attempt to damage awareness, Twitter's efforts failed. The producers reported via Twitter that they had acquired 8,000 new followers once they returned to active status. So a whole lot of them, from Twitter to women's television networks, tried to suppress the movie on its opening weekend. And the result was higher than forecast traffic. Just thought you'd like to know. Hey, and finally, on the same subject, I want you local listeners to be sure and hear this. Christian radio K-Love, they refused to air Unplanned ads. Why? They said it was being too political. That's right. You folks that donate to K-Love down in Charlotte, it's on the radio out of Charlotte. Yeah, too political for them. Christian radio giant K-Love found itself in hot water when executives at the company blocked commercials for the pro-life movie Unplanned. The PureFlix film tells the story of Abby Johnson, a former Planned Parenthood clinic director who parted with the organization after she watched a doctor perform an abortion via ultrasound. Reportedly, almost 100 abortion clinic workers seek to leave the industry after seeing the pro-life movie Unplanned. Wow. Anyway, in late March, Johnson revealed the Christian radio network had banned ads for Unplanned, claiming the content was too political, which K-Love works to avoid. Johnson urged her Facebook followers to reach out to K-Love. Soon thereafter, the radio conglomerate doubled down on its decision, noting the company focuses on, quote, positive and encouraging content that is safe for the whole family, end quote. A sticking point for K-Love was the film's R rating. Johnson replied, calling K-Love's reasoning total bull, arguing the radio network promoted The Passion of Christ, which was also rated R. They can't even seem to keep track of what they stand for, she wrote on Facebook. What's going on now? Well, one day after Johnson's initial post criticizing K-Love, she posted an update suggesting the radio company had changed its tune. After meeting again today and with one of Unplanned producers, she wrote, K-Love Radio has decided to stand up for the unborn and beginning to promote Unplanned. But in a tweet posted later on Friday, Johnson said K-Love is still not airing advertisements for the pro-life movie, which debuted in late March. A couple of quotes on this. One from Goins Phillips, this kind of flew under the radar, but K-Love refused to air ads for Unplanned movie until Abby Johnson pressed the radio network. Christian Radio K-Love banned Unplugged ads for being too political, then changed its mind. But they came back again and took it off. Few personal comments, folks. I like the music on K-Love. I hit it once in a while. Don't listen to it regular. In the future, I won't be listening to it at all. You can bet that. If it's too political for this so-called Christian radio station, it's not what I'm looking for in Christian programming. By the way, they take our gifts to maintain their program, our contributions, maybe some people their tithes. Think about it. Think about their stand here before you send any more dollars to K-Love Radio. In the meantime, if you hear their advertisers, how about putting a little pressure on them too? Let's let people know how we stand. Well, I'm changing subjects on you. I want to talk a little bit now about the church fire over in France. Paul Joseph Watson notes that 2 churches in France are vandalized every day, and no one cares. This government, this regime, including the Pope, including the cardinals, shut their mouths, saying, wow, they don't care at all. Journalist Lepente highlighted recent released statistics that show that there were 1,062 anti-Christian acts in 2018 compared to just 100 anti-Muslim acts. Throughout 2018, no less than 875 churches in France were targeted. 2 churches were vandalized per day, according to Lepente, adding, quote, this government, this regime, including the Pope, including the cardinals, shut their mouth, say nothing when our churches are being vandalized. And in contrast, the minute there's a mosque that has a pot of pork sausage in front of it, there's immediate arrest and prison for the person who did it. Apologies from the whole of France. The stigmatization of racism and so on. It's an absolutely unbearable double standard. Gives you something to think about, doesn't it? Now look at this with me. More to the storm than being told by MSM. The mainline media is hiding the story of the fire of the cathedral. Monday, the Holy Week, was a particularly sensitive time for Notre Dame Cathedral to burn. Fire destroyed the roof and spire as well as much of the interior. It's difficult to see such magnificent Christian architect go up in flames, yet no lives were lost, even with the building full of worshipers, workers, and some tourists. Standing at the center of Paris since the foundation stone was laid in the year 1163, the monumental Gothic cathedral took more than 100 years to build. And it was perhaps the crowning achievement of an age when Christians prioritized enduring beauty to reflect the eternal glory of the Creator. To be sure, there were also other motivations for such grand enterprises and external beauty that does not cover internal rot. But building a place of worship meant to last for centuries is, sadly, a lost art. The first question meant to last is whether Monday's fire was set deliberately, though authorities have said it was an accident amid a multi-million-dollar euro renovation. Already this year, however, vandals have numerously attacked Catholic churches across France, destroying various objects in them or harming the buildings, including by setting 2 of them on fire. According to the Daily Signal, in 2017 alone, the French government recorded 887 attacks on Christian artifacts or churches. It's unclear if any of these attacks have been attributed to Muslims, but given the rise of radical Islam in Europe, it's sure not unthinkable, folks. It sure isn't. France, where at least 1/8 of the population follows Islam, has been the world's largest number of Muslims. And of course, other deadly attacks in France have been perpetrated by radical Islamists. Yet far more important than the burning of Notre Dame is the metaphor it creates for Western Christianity. Once the center of Christendom, Europe has descended over the last 2 centuries into a secular, post-Christian, and often anti-Christian malaise. Arguably, Europe was always more culturally Christian than doctrinally Christian. But now, instead of the church being the center of society, government is. Nominal Christians have exchanged the truth of Scripture for the lies of self-worship. They've rejected God's authority, substituting their own feeling. To most of the French, Notre Dame itself had become little more than a popular tourist attraction, and most of their mourning has nothing to do with losing a symbol of Christianity, but rather a cultural museum of national pride. Jesus himself might have called it a whitewashed tomb. The resulting vacuum in Europe is being filled by Islam, which aims to replace Christianity and become the world's dominant religion. Europe is far down that path that America has only begun to tread. But such Christianity hardly needs an external enemy when it's already committing suicide. Notre Dame, then, is not just one cathedral up in flames. No, folks, it's all of Western Christianity. Still, there's always hope. Christians and Christianity itself never find perfection in themselves. In fact, that's the point. Fallen humanity needs a Savior, and we celebrate His sacrifice and resurrection during the Holy Week. Indeed, that the Notre Dame cross survived the fire may just remind us that hope, renewal, and redemption remain. This all by God's grace. After all, Christ promised that the gates of hell shall not prevail against His church. But did France burn Notre Dame Cathedral to appease Islam? Interesting thought. With much of the famous Cathedral of Notre Dame in France now burned to the ground after standing tall for over 800 years and through 2 world wars, we need to have a look at it, a serious look, and we need to try to bring the truth out. So let's take a last look at a story published at the Gatestone Institute on April 14th, written by a Raymond Ibrahim. Steve Quayle had links to it on his website last Sunday, entitled "The European Churches, Vandalized, Defecated on, and Torched Every Day," end quote. Folks, is it just a coincidence that one of the oldest and most historical churches in the world was burned to the ground the day after, and at a period of time where Europeans are going out of their way to placate Islam? Well, according to CNN, French President Macron simply stated that, quote, "Sad tonight to see this part of us burn." A dynamic statement from the leader of France. Paul Joseph Watson reports that while the media in Paris is claiming the church fire was due to renovation work, the work that was supposedly taking place there, one church worker has claimed the fire was intentionally started. As Watson's report, Time columnist Christopher Hayes tweeted the following: "A Jesuit friend in Paris who works in Notre Dame told my cathedral staff the fire was intentionally set," end quote. And then quickly the tweet was deleted. While sounding ludicrous, as Watson has reported, that St. Sulpice Church in Paris was deliberately set on fire earlier this year, although the media reports downplayed the story. And as a previously mentioned Gatestone Institute story had reported, all of these attacks against Christian churches and Christians has become a very worrying trend, especially with the mainstream media ignoring it. Countless churches throughout the Western Europe are being vandalized, defecated on, and torched. In France, 2 churches are desecrated every day on average. According to PI News, a German news site, 1,063 attacks on Christian churches or symbols, like crucifixes or icons, statues. Over 1,000 were registered in France in 2018. This represents a 17% increase compared to the previous year, when 878 attacks were registered, meaning that such attacks are only going from bad to worse. Similar reports are coming out of Germany. 4 separate churches were vandalized and or torched in March alone. In this country, Germany, PI News explained, quote, "There's a creeping war against everything that symbolizes Christianity. These are attacks on mountain summit crosses, on sacred statues by the wayside, on churches, and recently also on cemeteries." Who's primarily behind this ongoing and increasing attack on the churches in Europe? The same German report offers a hint. Their quote, "Crosses are broken, altars smashed, Bibles set on fire, baptismal fonts overturned, and the church doors smeared with Islamic expressions like Allah Akbar." Yeah, while the Gatestone Institute has long been reporting upon the crime of Islam upon Christians, this March of 2018, Over the Intercept reported that the Gatestone Institute is a fake news publisher for making such stories see the light of day. The sinister agenda is clear and a cover-up ongoing. From the Gatestone Institute story I'm going to quote, "In virtually every instance of church attacks, authorities and media, because the identity cover up and obscure the identity of the vandals. In those rare instances when the Muslim or migrant identity of the destroyer is leaked, the perpetrators are then presented as suffering from mental health issues." At a recent news conference, the report says, and I quote, "Hardly anyone writes and speaks against the increasing attacks on Christian symbols. There's an eloquent silence in both France and Germany about the scandal of the desecrations and the origin of the perpetrators. Not a word, not even the slightest hint that this could in any way lead to the suspicion of migrants doing it. It's not the perpetrators who are in danger of being ostracized, but those who dare to associate the desecration of Christian symbols with immigrant imports. They are accused of hatred, hate speech, and racism." Back on March 20th, Brett Bart reported that 12 French churches had been attacked and vandalized within a week. And if we look back at these 2 stories, we see that ISIS has threatened and attempted to carry out attacks upon Notre Dame Cathedral before. Attacks they hope would allow them to what? Rule the world. As a Jello report reported in a recent story, there is very real evidence that the inferno was intentionally set. This from the Daily Mail story on the fire reported that the 850-year-old cathedral was, quote, "built to be incredibly flammable," end quote. Oh yeah? Well, in spite of being built to be incredibly flammable, it stood for 850 plus years. With Christianity under an all-out attack across the planet, as is also seen in the April 15th story by Chris Mellaham of Information Liberation, which reports a Baptist pastor has had his Bank of America account shut down because of his fundamentalist preachings over the years. The very real war upon Christians and Christianity is being waged in full force, as Steve Quayle mentioned in SQ Note while linking to the Washington Standard story titled, "Pope Francis Praises Multiculturalism, Migrants Always Bring Riches," end quote. That comment is historically inaccurate, as what we've been watching has nothing less than the unfolding of a one-world government and a one-world religion as the book of Revelation unfolds. Before us from Steve Quayle, France has fallen into Islam, and it's obviously not an accident. Look up French Freemasonry. Bottom line, Europe has been conquered by Muslim money and Luciferian plots. Sadly, we will see some Muslims were actually laughing and smiling had smiles on their faces online as the Inferno burned one of the world's most historic churches to the ground. Yet as the Washington Standard reported, the burning of Notre Dame Cathedral is almost certainly an omen in this day and in this time when Christianity is under all-out attack across the world and the Western civilization is burnt down along with it. And this famous French journalist slams the Pope, the elites, and Macron for the Notre Dame fire. 2018, we had 1,063 anti-Christian acts. 2 churches were vandalized per day in France. The pride of our history is burning, and I accuse all of the Quislings of being responsible. Journalist Laponte then pointed out that Notre Dame Cathedral was vandalized a few years ago by feminist protesters who sprayed urine everywhere, and that the left's response was to laugh while the perpetrators were acquitted. The journalist then cited the story of how a Pakistani migrant who had only been in the country for 2 months caused extensive damage to the Basilica of St. Denis in Paris. Laponte said, and I quote, "I'd like to remind you that in the week of March 12, 12 French churches were vandalized." He noted this before citing several examples of how leading leftist figures in France have openly called for the destruction of Paris's historic buildings and monuments, and how political leaders don't give a darn about the situation. The situation is grave. The standard is scandalous. It's the pride of our history that's in the process of being burnt down, so he noted. And a little update on the Notre Dame update, nearly $1 billion in donations have poured in for the vast restoration of the fire-damaged Notre Dame Cathedral. But a pledge by French President Emmanuel Macron that it'll be completed within 5 years was facing accusations of being wildly off track. Macron said the renovations to restore the Ionic 19th century spire, vaulting, and 2/3 of the cathedral's roof would be completed in time for the Paris 2024 Olympics. "We're going to rebuild the cathedral to be even more beautiful, and I want it finished within 5 years, Macron said. Experts have said, however, that the ambitious timeline appears insufficient for such a massive operation. A French journalist notes 2 churches in France are vandalized every day, and no one gives a lick. This government, this regime, including the Pope, including the cardinals, shut their mouths, saying nothing. Again, quoting Lapine, he warns that France's history is in the process of burning down as a result of 2 churches being vandalized every day. This, and they don't even lift a finger. This, and it's not covered in the mainline media. 2 churches vandalized every day. Just think about it, folks. Think about it. It's earth-shattering, isn't it? I want to share something with you in closing. Time to get this squeezed in. Think about it. One nation under God. One day, a 6-year-old girl was sitting in a classroom. The teacher was going to explain evolution to the children. The teacher asked a little boy, "Tommy, do you see the tree outside?" And Tommy said, "Yes." The teacher asked, "Tommy, do you see the grass outside?" And again, he replied, "Yes." "Teacher, go outside and look up and see if you can see the sky." And Tommy returned just in a few minutes. And he said, "Okay, I saw the sky." And the teacher asked, "Did you see God up in the sky?" Tommy said, "No." Teacher said, "That's my point. We can't see God because he isn't there. Probably he doesn't even exist." A little girl spoke up and wanted to ask the boy some questions. The teacher agreed, and the little girl asked the boy, "Tommy, do you see the tree outside?" And he said, "Yes." The little girl said, "Tommy, do you see the grass outside?" And he said, "Yeah." "And did you see the sky?" "Yeah." "And do you see the teacher?" "Yes." "Do you see her brain?" "No," Tommy replied. The little girl, "Then according to what we were taught today in school, maybe she doesn't even have one." For we walk by faith, not by sight. I wanted to share it with you. In this hour of need, in this hour of disturbances throughout the world, in this hour of attacks on Christianity ever increasing, of Islam ever spreading and putting pressure on us, let us watch what's happening in America, good listeners. Let's look at what's happening up in Minnesota, which has a whole bunch of Muslims. Let's look at the 2 Muslims in the U.S. House of Representatives. Let's listen to what they have to say about their cause and about our Christ. Goodbye until next week.